Tariffs. To me, I think it's the most beautiful word in the dictionary. More beautiful than love.
As you've heard, Trump is enacting tariffs against our friends and allies, from Canada to Japan, from Mexico to the UK. And how do Americans feel about it? Well, it turns out that they are about as popular as Kristi Noem at a dog rescue. It's almost like Trump looked up how to start a recession in 60 days and said, yeah, that's it, dig it. Page 1, first arrest and deport all the workers who are the backbone of agriculture and manufacturing, then put huge tariffs on our allies and neighbors so inflation can take care of what's left of the middle class.
What does happen when you put tariffs on goods and you stop immigration and force migrants to leave in terms of wages?
Unless you're Hamilton, I'm kind of against it.
Isn't that going to be inflationary?
Of course. Of course.
Is it a one-time, though, and then
smooth
you sort of
haul? I don't know. I mean, when you see tariffs like that, obviously you think about 1929.
But now, after 8 years of the worst person in the world seducing the soulless Republican Party, these pencil-dick conservatives are now joining America's allies by pushing back. As Carville once said, it's the economy, stupid.
To the United States, but Fords and Chevys made in the United States, all those prices are going to skyrocket. Now, could Republicans in Congress specifically be doing more to push the president to try to de-escalate his trade war? What leverage do you have?
Well, in Article 1 in the Constitution, really tariffs should be a congressional initiated action. So this should come from Congress. However, I think we made a mistake. In the past, we passed legislation that gave the president some temporary tariff authorities. And I think we should look back and maybe restore the power back to Congress and take away the authorizations that we've allowed the presidents, not just President Trump, but President Biden and President Obama before him. This power should reside in the House and the Senate. And we have the power of the purse. And so I think we should restore these authorities back to the House.
Well, that's an interesting proposal. Let's see if that happens.
This is a Republican from Nebraska, not exactly a hotbed of progressive thought, opining on Trump's path to make America hate it again. Tariff! And while the threat by Musk, Elon, to primary anyone who is standing up to Trump, well, there's a feeling that the voters in these states, MAGA voters, they care more about their jobs, their mortgages, their savings, and their retirement than they do about Fat Donnie's inane declarations. Tariff! It is not just Nebraska. Republicans in Kansas know that Trump's plan is a disaster.
We earn a living in Kansas by what we sell around the globe. And we certainly a lot of focus, rightfully so, on agriculture, on farmers and ranchers, and Kansas is clearly an ag state. We bear the brunt in the tariff retaliation from China and other places. So when we get in a tariff war, it is Kansas agriculture, our farmers, ranchers, and the communities in which they live that suffer the most significant consequences. It's not just an agricultural issue. We are a state that manufactures automobiles and significant manufacturing of aerospace and airplanes. And aluminum and steel are important components, as well as the supply chain. So we get retaliated on in agriculture, particularly with tariffs. And in both the case of agriculture and manufacturing, we are a beneficiary of NAFTA. And our trading relationship with Mexico and Canada are important. In fact, Mexico is the #1 purchaser of agriculture commodities from Kansas. Canada is #2 or 3, depending upon the year. One of the messages that I and other members of the Senate delivered to the White House was we understand the challenges we face with China, their stealing of our trade secrets, intellectual property, the cyber attacks. Mr. President, it would be useful if we could narrow the scope and focus on China. And to do that, we need to have a good a trading relationship with Mexico, Canada, the European Union. Let's single out our efforts worldwide. They share our concerns with what China is doing. Let's work together.
So here's the problem in a nutshell.
Win so much, you may even get tired of winning. And you'll say, please, please, it's too much winning. We can't take it anymore. Mr. President, it's too much. And I'll say, no, it isn't. We have to keep winning. We have to win more. We're going to win more. We're going to win.
Trump believes that he can put a tariff on all goods coming into the U.S., and that will in turn create business opportunities for, say, car manufacturers. But, and this is a big but, it's more expensive to make them here. Tariff! And combine that with deporting the only people who would work for less. Tariff! And the fact that these countries will add a tariff to what we try and sell in their countries, and you have a nightmare. Tariff! All created by the guy with 6 bankruptcies and billions in debt who isn't listening to people who actually understand this stuff. And his party and our allies are questioning how far and how bad can this go. I mean, how bad is it? Even Fox is freaking out.
DOGE has done in terms of cutting federal spending. There are lots of questions in terms of whether or not this is going to lead to a further slowdown. Can DOGE induce a recession with all of this cutting? And what about the tariffs and the pressure that brings to bear as well?
These tariffs, Cheryl's right on. These tariffs are really scary. And I think you're right. It has a real possibility of bringing on a recession.
And it's not just over at Fox. Many Trump voters who picked Donald Trump over Vice President Kamala Harris because of issues like the rising cost of living, maybe having some buyer's remorse.
Trump's capricious leadership is that nothing is certain until it happens, and his orders, especially on trade, are often reversed as soon as they're given. But Trump is promising that Wednesday, April 2nd, will be Liberation Day, when he imposes reciprocal dollar-for-dollar tariffs on nations that levy duties on U.S. goods, which will affect every American, raising prices at a time when MAGA country is already feeling the pain. Tariff! But while the grifter-in-chief is asking Americans to buy into a strategy that promises benefits down the road, it will require sacrifices for decades to come. Tariff! Trump's trade war has already wiped trillions of dollars in the markets. The Dow plunged 700 points on Friday alone, and that's creating a climate that's not different than the 1970s, stagflation, which is a recession with inflation. And Republicans are getting it. Well, most of them. Here's Peter Navarro, Trump's ass-kissing mouthpiece, who is to economics what Musk is to empathy, trying to pretzel logic his way on why tariffs are such a great idea.
We're going to raise about $100 billion with the auto tariffs alone. What we're going to do is, in the new tax bill that has to pass, it absolutely has to pass, we're going to provide tax benefits, tax credits to the people who buy American cars. This is a genius thing that President Trump promised on the campaign trail. So that's going to happen. In addition, the other tariffs are going to raise about $600 billion a year, about $6 trillion over a 10-year period. And we're going to have tax cuts. It's the biggest tax cut in American history.
All right, stop for a second. Let's examine this. Say we put a 25% tariff on foreign cars, which raises the prices of their cars because they're not going to eat 25%. And since no one buys our cars because these nations retaliate with tariffs of their own, our cars cost 25% more. Tariff. So Navarro says you're going to get a tax break if you buy a car made in the U.S., except that tax break means less revenue for the U.S. So that means less revenue for the government and more taxes. And the parts, almost every car made in America uses foreign parts, which too will increase in cost.
Brian Barnett, he is the Republican mayor of Rochester Hills, Michigan, which is a kind of a suburb of Detroit. It's also like, you can practically see Canada from Rochester Hills. Mayor, thank you so much for being with us. It's hard to know exactly what tariffs are going to go into place on April 2nd, as the president promised. But let's say it is 25% on all cars and car parts. What would the impact be on you in Rochester Hills?
Well, first, thanks for having me. It would be really a perfect storm. In Southeast Michigan, our biggest trading partners are Canada and Mexico, and our biggest industry is the mobility industry. So much of what we do in Southeast Michigan is tied to that industry, and every vehicle has parts made in Canada and Mexico. So it would be devastating. And, part of it, as you just shared, is the uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty as we enter this week where so much is supposed to happen. I think industries are really paralyzed to try to understand how to move forward.
How can you plan for this? I mean, what are you planning for?
Well, I've been talking to a lot of my businesses, my business community, to try to find out what they're doing. And I mean, the scenario is pretty simple. At least what most people think is, higher tariffs lead to higher cost leads to lower demand leads to lower production. And ultimately, that's what becomes a mayor's issue. Lower production and lower demand means job loss. And that really is a significant issue. We've gone through really challenging times in Southeast Michigan before. And I'm not sure, these are just negotiation tactics. I hope the president and his team are able to move quickly. I was pleased that he had a very positive meeting with the prime minister at the end of last week. But the uncertainty, you see the markets reacting to it. It's daunting. It's impossible to prepare.
You think this could lead to job losses in Rochester Hills?
I think it could very quickly. I think most of the folks I'm talking to say, they can survive this kind of back and forth for about maybe 30 days. They've been preparing to try to have supply here, to try to handle supply chains. But if this is something that we're waiting for jobs to repatriate back to the United States, we know that takes, that's a great and wonderful plan. We're all supportive of that. But that can take 24 to 36 months, then most companies wouldn't be operating at the same levels they are now. If you have this tariff environment for 2 or 3 years, it simply couldn't be the same.
Trump's professor at Wharton, where Donnie Diapers went to school, called Trump the dumbest goddamn student he ever had. And from that, we can say he accurately forecasted Trump's limited intellectual growth, but not his ability to grift. The question is, and has been for the last 8 years, will Republicans finally display the stones to stand up to Trump and for the America we once were?
Well, first of all, Mr. President, we don't work for you. I don't work for you.
But if the past is an indication, the answer is, we have a long way to go.
What do we take away from this? Are your leaders incompetent, unqualified people compromising national security?
Yes, 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 yes.
Goddamn right.
It's not fair.
They had what? Bloated and fat and disgusting.
I like that.
We're a nation that speaks English.
Look, if something like this, that thing start goggling.
I don't want to talk about this stuff.
Am I wrong? Yes.
Tick-tock.
You're in a lot of trouble, Donnie.
I think he's crazy.
I'm Chip Franklin.